The stars burned cold in the void of space as Commander Daehyun watched the alien vessel approach. It was massive, 10 times the size of his colony ship, covered in dark red armor that seemed to drink in the light. The bridge crew of the New Soul stood silent, waiting for whatever came next. The hologram flickered to life in the center of the bridge. A creature appeared, tall and covered in crimson scales. Its eyes were yellow and sharp like a predator's. This was Emperor Vathrok, ruler of the Velkari Empire. He had conquered 47 star systems, and now he stood before them with nothing but contempt in his gaze. "Humans," Vathrok said, his voice deep and rumbling. "Your species is weak. Your ships are primitive. You will surrender all your colonies to the Velkari Empire, or we will take them by force. You have 1 solar cycle to comply." Daehyun felt his hands tighten into fists, but he kept his face calm. "We'll relay your message to Earth," he said quietly. The Emperor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. "You will do more than relay. You will beg. All inferior species beg when they meet the Velkari." The hologram vanished, and the alien ship pulled away, disappearing into faster-than-light travel. Back on Earth, Captain Minji stood in the council chambers of the United Defense Council. Around her sat the leaders of humanity's military and government. Ambassador Hyunwoo was speaking, his voice careful and measured. "We should negotiate," Hyunwoo said. "The Velkari have never lost a war. They have resources we can't match. Perhaps we can find a peaceful solution." Minji shook her head. "They're not interested in peace. You heard the Emperor. He wants us to beg. He wants to break us before he even starts fighting." "Then what do you suggest?" asked an older counselor. "We can't win against an empire that controls 47 systems." Minji stood up, her eyes hard. "We don't need to win. We just need to make them regret ever finding us." She turned to the communication officer. "Send our response. Tell the Emperor that humanity rejects his terms. Tell him that if he wants war, we'll give him a war he'll never forget." The council chamber erupted in shocked voices, but Minji didn't back down. She had seen the footage of what the Velkari did to conquered species. Slavery, execution, total domination. If humanity was going to fall, they would fall fighting in a way that would echo through history. The Velkari didn't wait long to respond. 3 weeks later, their ships appeared over Titan's Rest, a mining colony on the edge of human space. 5,000 Velkari shock troops descended on the small settlement, where only 200 human Marines were stationed. Colonel Jae-won watched them land through his scope. The Velkari were huge, each one standing over 7 feet tall, armed with plasma weapons that could cut through standard armor. They moved with confidence, expecting an easy victory. "Sir, we should evacuate," said one of his lieutenants. "We can't hold against those numbers." Jae-won smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Who said anything about holding? He activated the mining charges that his engineers had spent the last 3 weeks placing throughout the colony's tunnel system. "We're not trying to win this battle. We're trying to teach them a lesson." When the Velkari entered the mining tunnels, Jae-won gave the order. The explosions ripped through the underground network, collapsing hundreds of tunnels at once. 3,000 Velkari warriors were buried alive in seconds, crushed under tons of rock and metal. The remaining Velkari forces found themselves facing human Marines who fought with a savagery they had never encountered before. The humans used knives when they ran out of bullets. They used rocks and broken metal when they lost their knives. They set traps using their own fallen soldiers as bait. They fought in ways that made no tactical sense, throwing themselves at the enemy even when surrounded, just to take one more Velkari down with them. When the battle ended, only 17 human Marines survived. But the Velkari had lost over 4,000 warriors, and those who survived were shaken. They had expected weak prey. Instead, they found something that scared them. General Cathrok stood in the war room on the Velkari homeworld, reviewing the battle footage. He had served Emperor Vathrok for 40 years, conquering species after species. But this was different. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose, like death meant nothing to them. "They destroyed their own colony," Cathrok said to his advisors. "They killed themselves just to take our warriors with them." "What kind of species does that?" One of the younger officers spoke up. "They're desperate. Once we commit our full fleet, they'll break like all the others." But Cathrok wasn't so sure. He had seen the eyes of the human commander in the footage, right before the tunnels collapsed. There was no fear there, no desperation, just cold calculation. The humans had traded 200 lives for 4,000 Velkari, and they seemed to think it was a good deal. He took his concerns to the Emperor, but Vathrok dismissed them with a wave of his clawed hand. "You're getting old, Cathrok. One battle means nothing. The humans got lucky. When we crush their core worlds, they'll surrender like all the rest." Cathrok bowed and left, but the unease remained in his chest. He had a feeling that the Emperor was making a terrible mistake. The humans weren't fighting like a species trying to survive. They were fighting like a species that had already decided the cost of victory didn't matter. On Earth, Captain Minji received the reports from Titan's Rest. 17 survivors out of 200. It was a bloodbath. But the footage was spreading across human space, showing what ordinary Marines could do when they refused to quit. Recruitment numbers were up 300%. People weren't running from the war. They were running toward it. Hyunwoo came to her office that evening. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. 200 people dead to kill 4,000 Velkari. Minji looked at him with tired eyes. "Ask me that question when the war is over. Right now we've shown the galaxy that humans don't break easy. We've shown the Velkari that every inch of human space will cost them blood. That's worth something. And if we lose anyway, then we lose," Minji said. "But they'll remember us. Every species in this galaxy will remember what happened when someone tried to make humanity beg." The war had truly begun, and neither side understood yet just how far it would go, or what lines would be crossed before it ended. The Velkari committed their main battle fleet 6 months after Titan's Rest. 300 warships, the largest military force ever assembled by the Empire, began their journey toward Mars. The Red Planet held 4 billion human colonists and was the second most important world in human space. Emperor Vathrok himself announced that Mars would fall within a week. Admiral Wonshik stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, watching the Velkari armada approach on his screens. His fleet numbered only 30 ships, and most of them were older models, built before humanity even knew aliens existed. The smart move would be to defend Mars' orbit, to make the Velkari fight for every meter of space. Wonshik wasn't interested in smart moves. "All ships begin retreat," he ordered. His officers looked at him with confusion, but they followed orders. The human fleet turned away from Mars and headed toward the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The Velkari fleet pursued, confident in their victory. On the enemy flagship, Commander Zethrak laughed as he watched the humans run. "They don't even have the courage to fight," he told his crew. "This will be easier than we thought." But Wonshik had spent 4 months preparing the asteroid belt for this moment. Human engineers had attached massive thrusters to hundreds of asteroids, turning them into weapons that could be aimed and fired like bullets. The asteroids ranged from the size of cars to the size of buildings, and they were all pointing at the path the Velkari fleet was taking. "Fire everything," Wonshik said calmly. The asteroids began to move, accelerating to incredible speeds. The Velkari detected them too late. The first impacts hit their forward ships, punching through shields and armor like they were made of paper. A ship-sized asteroid traveling at thousands of meters per second carried more energy than any weapon the Velkari had ever seen. The Velkari fleet tried to scatter, but the asteroids came from all directions. Wonshik had planned the attack for months, calculating trajectories and timing with perfect precision. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Others were torn in half by the impacts. Some tried to shoot down the asteroids, but there were too many coming too fast. When the attack ended, 180 Velkari warships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors limped toward Mars, their formation broken, their confidence shattered. Wonshik's fleet swooped in to finish them off, and the Battle of the Belt, as it would be called, ended with humanity's first major victory. But Wonshik knew this was just the beginning. He had hurt the Velkari, but he hadn't beaten them. The Empire had resources across 47 systems. They could build more ships, send more warriors. Humanity needed to do more than win battles. They needed to break the enemy's will to fight. That was where Yunji came in. Yunji wasn't a soldier. She was a civilian coordinator on Mars, responsible for managing refugees and aid distribution. But she had a background in psychology and media, and Captain Minji had given her a special assignment. Yunji was in charge of the propaganda war. The Velkari prisoners from the Belt Battle were kept in comfortable cells. They were fed well, given medical care, treated better than most prisoners of war, But Yunji made sure that every moment of their captivity was recorded and broadcast across Velkari space. The broadcasts didn't show torture or abuse. Instead, they showed something more disturbing. They showed Velkari warriors talking calmly about how they had been wrong. They spoke about how the Empire had lied to them, how humanity was stronger than they had believed. Some of them cried. Others simply stared at the cameras with empty eyes. The broadcasts also showed human soldiers. But these soldiers weren't giving speeches about honor or justice. They laughed as they described the ways they had killed Velkari warriors. They showed off trophies taken from the dead. They spoke about the Velkari with casual contempt, like they were discussing hunting animals. The effect on Velkari morale was devastating. Soldiers across the Empire began to question their orders. Some deserted. Others fought with less conviction. The image of the invincible Velkari warrior was cracking. Emperor Vathrok watched these broadcasts with growing rage. He had never been so humiliated in his long life. These humans, these primitive creatures, were making a mockery of his empire. He decided that the only solution was to take personal command of the war. Against the advice of General Cathrok, Vathrok assembled a fleet of his finest ships and set course for Earth itself. He would not delegate this task any longer. He would crush humanity's homeworld personally and make an example that would echo through the galaxy for 1,000 years. Lieutenant Sungho was working the night shift in communications when he intercepted the Emperor's broadcast. Vathrok had sent a message to all of human space, announcing his intention to personally lead the assault on Earth. He described in detail what he would do to humanity's homeworld, how he would enslave the survivors, how he would make humans serve the Velkari for generations. But in his arrogance, Vathrok had revealed something crucial. His message included his travel route, his fleet composition, and his estimated arrival time. He wanted humans to know he was coming. He wanted them to feel fear. Sungho immediately sent the information up the chain of command. Within hours, it reached Captain Minji in the War Council chambers. She looked at the data with a smile that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "He's giving us exactly what we need," she said. "He's so confident that he's told us when and where he'll be." Hyunwoo spoke up. "We should evacuate Earth. If he's bringing his personal fleet, we can't stop him." "We're not going to stop him," Minji said. "We're going to let him land." The room fell silent. Finally, General Bowman spoke. "You want to let the Emperor of the Velkari Empire land on Earth?" "Not just land," Minji said. "We're going to invite him to the exact spot where we want him. And then we're going to take him." The plan was insane. It relied on the Emperor's arrogance, on his need to broadcast his victory from Earth's surface. It meant abandoning Earth's cities, making them look defeated and broken. It meant hiding thousands of soldiers underground in conditions that would break most people. But humanity had already proven they could endure terrible conditions. They had proven they could sacrifice their own people for strategic advantage. And now they would prove they could be patient. Major Taeyong volunteered to lead the Special Forces units that would hide in the ruins of Seoul. He and 3,000 soldiers moved into the sewers and tunnels beneath the city. They brought enough supplies to last for weeks, maybe months if necessary. They practiced their attack routes in the dark, learning every corner of the underground. The evacuation of Earth's major cities began. Billions of people moved to shelters in the countryside or evacuated to orbital stations. The cities were left looking abandoned, destroyed by previous Velkari bombardments and now seemingly given up by their defenders. When Emperor Vathrok's fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, they found no resistance. The human defense fleet had withdrawn. The cities lay in ruins with no sign of military presence. To Vathrok, it looked like total victory. The humans had finally broken. He ordered his flagship to land in the ruins of Seoul. He would broadcast his triumph from humanity's former capital, standing on the ashes of their civilization. 10,000 elite Velkari warriors accompanied him as an honor guard. As his ship settled onto the broken streets of Seoul, Vathrok felt satisfaction flow through him. The war was over. Humanity had learned its place. Now he would make sure every species in the galaxy learned the lesson as well. He stepped out of his ship and breathed the air of Earth. Around him, his warriors formed up in parade formation. Cameras were positioned to broadcast the moment across all channels. Vathrok began to speak, his voice booming across the ruins. "Humans, you see now the price of defiance. You see now what happens when a lesser species challenges the might of the Velkari Empire." He never Finish the sentence. The ruins of Seoul erupted with fire and death as Major Tae-young gave the signal to attack. The attack came from everywhere at once. The streets that had looked empty suddenly filled with human soldiers pouring out of sewers, buildings, and underground tunnels. Suicide drones launched from hidden positions, small and fast, each one carrying enough explosives to take down a Valkyrie warrior. The drones swarmed the honor guard like angry insects. Major Tae-young led his forces from the front. His soldiers had been living underground for 6 weeks, waiting in the dark and filth of Seoul sewers. They smelled like death and looked like ghosts, but they moved with perfect coordination. Every step of this attack had been practiced hundreds of times. The electromagnetic pulse hit first, generated by devices buried throughout the landing zone. The Valkyrie personal shields flickered and died. Their communication systems went dark. For 30 seconds they were vulnerable, and 30 seconds was all the humans needed. Chemical weapons came next, released from hidden canisters. The gas was engineered specifically to target Valkyrie biology, attacking their respiratory system. It wouldn't kill them immediately, but it would make them weak, make them slow. The Valkyrie warriors began to stumble, gasping for air through their scaled faces. Then came the bullets. Human soldiers fired from every direction. They aimed for joints, for eyes, for the weak points in Valkyrie armor that human intelligence had identified over months of studying captured equipment. The honor guard tried to form defensive positions, but they were surrounded, blinded by the gas, choking on air that burned their lungs. Emperor Vathrok realized too late what had happened. The abandoned city had been a trap. The humans had sacrificed their own capital just to lure him into this killing zone. He tried to reach his flagship, but human soldiers blocked every path. His elite warriors fell around him, dying in the ruins of a city they thought they had already destroyed. Vathrok was not helpless. He stood over 7 feet tall, stronger than any human, covered in armor that had been forged in the heart of a star. He carried a plasma blade that could cut through steel. When the humans came for him, he killed them with terrible efficiency. Sergeant Jiwon watched the Emperor through her rifle scope from a building 3 blocks away. She had been waiting for this moment since the war began. Her family had died when the Valkyrie bombed New York. Her brother had died at Titan's Rest. She had 1 bullet loaded, a special round designed by human engineers for exactly this purpose. She wasn't aiming to kill. Her orders were specific. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled faster than sound. It struck Emperor Vathrok in the spine, precisely between the 4th and 5th vertebrae. The round was designed to shatter on impact, sending fragments through the spinal cord without exiting the body. Vathrok felt his legs go numb instantly. He fell forward, unable to move anything below his chest. The most powerful being in the Valkyrie Empire lay paralyzed on the broken streets of Seoul. Human soldiers swarmed over him. They stripped away his weapons and armor with professional efficiency. They injected him with drugs to keep him conscious but unable to resist. Within minutes, Vathrok was loaded into an armored transport, secured with chains that could hold a ship's engine. The entire battle had lasted 9 minutes. Of the 10,000 Valkyrie warriors who had landed with their emperor, fewer than 300 survived. Human casualties were heavy, over 2,000 dead, but Major Tae-young considered it a fair trade. They had captured the emperor. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. The Valkyrie fleet in orbit didn't know what to do. Their emperor was captured, their honor guard decimated. Some wanted to attack Earth immediately, to rescue Vathrok or die trying. Others argued for retreat, for regrouping and planning a proper rescue. While they debated, human defense forces surrounded them, threatening to destroy any ship that moved. On Earth, in the command bunker beneath Geneva, the Human Defense Council met to decide the Emperor's fate. The room was filled with the military and civilian leaders who had guided humanity through the war. The atmosphere was tense. Ambassador Hyunwoo spoke first. "We need to treat him with dignity. Use him as a bargaining chip for peace. If we harm him, the Valkyrie will never negotiate. They'll fight to the last warrior." General Bowman shook his head. "You don't understand their culture. The Valkyrie respect only strength. They see mercy as weakness. If we're kind to their emperor, they'll think we're afraid of them." "So what do you suggest?" Hyunwoo asked. "Torture? Execution? That would make us no better than them." "I'm not suggesting either," Bowman said. He pulled up intelligence reports on the holographic display. "According to our analysis of Valkyrie culture, Public humiliation is worse than death. If we want to end this war, we need to break their will completely. We need to show them that their emperor is powerless. Captain Minji listened to the debate with a heavy heart. She knew what Bowman was suggesting. It was brutal, cruel, and would horrify the civilized species of the galaxy. It would also work. The Velkari would see their emperor humiliated, and understand that humanity was not a species to be conquered. There's a historical precedent, Minji said quietly. In ancient Earth history, conquering armies would parade defeated kings through the streets. It was meant to demonstrate total victory, to break the spirit of the conquered people. Yunwu looked at her with shock. You can't be serious. That's barbaric. So is orbital bombardment, Minji replied. So is slavery. So is genocide, which is what the Velkari threatened us with. We didn't start this war, but we're going to finish it in a way that ensures no one ever threatens humanity again. The vote was close, but the decision was made. Emperor Vathrok would be paraded through the ruins of every major Earth city. The galaxy would watch. The Velkari would see their emperor reduced to a prisoner, dragged through the streets like a common criminal. It would be cruel, humiliating, and effective. Engineer Suhyun was given the task of building the cage. It needed to be strong enough to hold a Velkari emperor, open enough for everyone to see him, and mobile enough to travel across continents. She worked for 3 days straight, designing and building a structure that would become infamous across the galaxy. Medic Yuna was assigned to keep the emperor alive and conscious. He needed to experience everything, needed to be aware of his humiliation. She administered drugs that would keep him from slipping into shock or unconsciousness. She monitored his vital signs constantly, making sure he remained healthy enough to endure what was coming. During those 3 days, Vathrok lay in a cell beneath Geneva. His legs remained paralyzed, his mighty body reduced to helplessness. Human guards watched him constantly, but they didn't speak to him, didn't acknowledge him except to provide food and water. On the 3rd day, Dr. Hyen came to his cell. She was a psychologist, specializing in alien species behavior. She sat across from the Emperor and studied him with professional interest. Do you understand what's going to happen to you? She asked. Vathrok's yellow eyes burned with rage, but his voice was weak. You will regret this. My empire will tear your species apart. Your empire is already falling apart, Heun said calmly. She showed him a tablet with news feeds from Velkari space. His generals were fighting each other for control. His son had declared himself the new emperor. Planets were rebelling, refusing to send more warriors to die for a lost cause. You did this, Vathrok hissed. You dishonored me. No, Heun said. You dishonored yourself when you underestimated us. You thought humans would beg. You thought we would break. Instead, we fought back in ways you never imagined. And now you're going to help us teach the galaxy a lesson about what happens when you threaten Earth. She stood to leave, but Vathrok called out, Why not just kill me? Death would be merciful. Heun looked back at him with cold eyes. We're not interested in mercy. We're interested in making sure this never happens again. The cage was ready. The route was planned. Broadcast drones were positioned along every kilometer of the journey. Captain Minji would personally lead the procession, making it an official military operation. As they loaded the paralyzed emperor into the cage, Vathrok finally understood that humanity was different from any species the Velkari had ever conquered. These humans didn't follow the rules of civilized warfare. They didn't care about honor or dignity or the opinions of other species. They cared only about survival, and they would do absolutely anything to ensure it. The procession began at dawn in the ruins of Seoul. The cage sat on a military transport truck, open on all sides so everyone could see inside. Emperor Vathrok lay within, his paralyzed body propped up so he couldn't hide his face. Chains bound him to the cage floor, thick enough to hold a starship. Captain Minji walked at the front of the procession, dressed in full military uniform. Behind her marched a guard of 100 soldiers, their faces blank and professional. Above them, broadcast drones captured every moment, sending the images across every channel to every planet in the galaxy. The truck moved slowly through the ruined streets. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky, shattered by Velkari orbital bombardments. The streets were cracked and scarred. This had been a city of 20 million people. Now it was a graveyard, but the dead were not alone. Survivors lined the route, thousands of them standing in silence. They didn't cheer or shout. They didn't celebrate. They simply watched as their enemy's emperor was dragged through the ruins his forces had created. An old woman held a photograph of a young man in a military uniform. A child stood with empty eyes that had seen too much death. A man missing his right arm stared at the cage with a face like stone. The silence was more terrible than any screaming could have been. Vathrok tried to maintain his dignity at first. He kept his face blank, his eyes forward, refusing to show weakness. But as the hours passed and the truck rolled on through kilometer after kilometer of destruction, something began to break inside him. He had ordered the bombardment of this city. He had watched the casualty reports with satisfaction. But seeing the faces of the survivors, seeing what his victory had actually cost, was different than watching numbers on a screen. The procession moved to Tokyo next, then to what remained of Shanghai. Each city was the same. Ruins and silence in the eyes of people who had survived the unsurvivable. The broadcast drones recorded everything. The galaxy watched in horror and fascination. Dr. Han joined the procession in Shanghai. Every evening when the truck stopped for the night, she would conduct interviews with the Emperor. These interviews were broadcast live across all channels, with translation provided in hundreds of languages. "How does it feel?" she asked during the first interview. "Seeing what your war has done?" Vathrok refused to answer. His yellow eyes stared past her, trying to maintain the last shreds of his pride. Haon was patient. She showed him footage on a tablet. "These are your soldiers, watch." The video showed Velkhari warriors surrendering en masse, throwing down their weapons, refusing to fight. "Your military is falling apart. Over 40,000 warriors have deserted in the last week." "Lies," Vathrok hissed. "No lies," Haon said calmly. "We're recruiting them now, training them to fight against your empire. Some are doing it for money. Others are doing it because they've seen what we did to you and they're afraid of what we might do to them." She showed him more footage. Velkhari planets declaring independence, his son proclaiming himself emperor while calling his father weak and broken. The empire Vathrok had spent his life building was crumbling, and he could do nothing but watch. By the second week, Vathrok had stopped trying to maintain his dignity. His scales had lost their crimson sheen, turning dull and gray. He no longer tried to hold his head up. He lay in the cage like a broken thing, barely conscious of the crowds that watched him pass. The procession crossed the Pacific Ocean on military transport ships, then continued through the ruins of Los Angeles and Mexico City. In South America, they dragged him through the remains of São Paulo and Buenos Aires. Everywhere, the pattern was the same: silence, ruins, and the faces of survivors. In the Velkhari home system, civil war raged. General Vathrok tried to organize a rescue mission, but Prince Darvok blocked him, claiming that his father was already dead in spirit and not worth saving. Vathrok realized with bitter clarity that Vathrok's humiliation had accomplished exactly what the humans intended. The Emperor's power was completely destroyed, not by death but by public disgrace. The procession reached Africa and moved through the ruins of Cairo and Lagos. In Europe, they dragged him through London, Paris, and Berlin. Each city had been home to millions. Each city was now mostly empty, filled with ghosts and memories. Private Minsu joined the procession in Berlin. He was young, barely 20 years old, but he had seen more death than most soldiers experience in a lifetime. His entire family had died in New York when the Velkhari used orbital bombardment to kill 2 billion people in a single attack. Captain Minji called him to her command vehicle. "We're approaching New York soon," she said. "I want to give you a choice." Minsu waited, unsure what she meant. "The Emperor ordered the attack on New York personally," Minji continued. "He gave the command to kill 2 billion people, including everyone you loved. When we reach the memorial, you can end his life. Give him a quick death, cleaner than he deserves, or we can continue the procession." Minsu thought about it for a long time. He thought about his mother's smile, his father's laugh, his little sister's drawings that he still carried in his pack. He thought about standing in the ruins of his home, finding nothing but ash and broken concrete. "How long will the procession continue?" he asked. "As long as necessary," Minji said. "Until every human city has seen him. Until the galaxy understands what happens when you make war on Earth." Minsu nodded slowly. "Then let it continue. Death is too easy. Let him see what he did. Let him live with it." The procession reached New York on a gray morning. The memorial stood in what had once been Central Park. It was a simple structure, just a black wall with billions of names carved into it. The names of the dead listed alphabetically, stretching for kilometers. The truck stopped in front of the memorial. The silence was absolute. Thousands of survivors stood watching, and above them the broadcast drones captured everything for the galaxy to see. Captain Minji stepped forward. She didn't give a speech. She didn't explain or justify. She simply gestured to the memorial, then to the cage, letting the images speak for themselves. Vathrok looked at the wall of names. His mind couldn't comprehend the scale of it. 2 billion names. 2 billion lives ended by his command. He had thought of them as numbers, as obstacles to his victory. But seeing the names, understanding that each one represented a person with family and dreams and hope, something inside him finally broke completely. He began to weep. Not quietly, but in great shaking sobs that racked his paralyzed body. The Emperor of the Velkhari Empire, the conqueror of 47 star systems, cried like a child in his cage while the galaxy watched. Dr. Hyun conducted her interview that evening in the shadow of the memorial. "Do you understand now?" she asked. Vathrok could barely speak. His voice was a broken whisper. "I understand. What do you understand?" "I understand that we should never have come here. I understand that humanity is not like other species. I understand that I have destroyed everything." Hyun nodded. "Your empire is surrendering. They'll sign the terms tomorrow." "The war is over. Why?" Vathrok asked. "Why not just kill me?" "Because the galaxy needed to see this," Hyun said. "They needed to understand that humanity will not be conquered. They needed to see what happens when you push us too far. You're not a prisoner, Emperor. You're a lesson." The procession continued for 6 months total. They dragged him through every major city on Earth, through ruins and memorials, past the faces of billions of survivors. By the end, Vathrok was barely recognizable. His mind had fractured under the weight of what he had done and what had been done to him. The Velkhari Empire officially surrendered before the procession ended. They agreed to every human demand: return all conquered territories, pay reparations for 100 years, submit their military to human oversight. They agreed because they had seen their emperor broken, and they wanted no more of what humanity could do. When the procession finally ended, they loaded Vathrok onto a ship and sent him home. He was still alive, still paralyzed, still conscious. The humans could have killed him at any point, but they chose not to. Death would have been mercy, and they wanted the lesson to continue. The broadcast went out from every human settlement across 3 star systems. It wasn't a celebration or a victory speech. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered by General Bowman from the steps of the rebuilt United Defense Council building. "This is what happens when you make war on humanity," Bowman said, his voice calm and measured. "This is the price of attacking Earth. Emperor Vathrok came to our world promising to make us beg. Instead, we dragged him through the ruins of our cities until he broke. This was not revenge. This was a lesson." Behind him on massive screens, footage played of the procession. 6 months of images showing the Emperor's decline from arrogant conqueror to broken prisoner. The galaxy had watched it all happen in real time, but now humanity compiled it into a message that would be broadcast for generations. "We didn't start this war," Bowman continued. "We didn't want it. But when forced to fight, we fought without limits. We sacrificed our own people, destroyed our own cities, and did things that civilized species find horrifying. We did these things because we understood that survival matters more than reputation." The screens showed Titan's Rest collapsing, burying thousands of Velkhari warriors. They showed the asteroid belt attack that destroyed 180 warships. They showed the cage, the procession, the broken emperor weeping at the memorial. "Let this be understood by every species, every empire, every power in this galaxy," Bowman said. "Humanity will not be conquered. We will not beg. We will not surrender. And if you force us to fight, we will make you regret it for the rest of your existence." This message is now complete. The Velkhari Empire's formal surrender came 3 days later. The terms were brutal but fair. All conquered territories would be returned to their original inhabitants. The Velkhari would pay reparations to humanity for the next 100 years, funding the rebuilding of destroyed cities and the care of survivors. Most importantly, the Velkhari military would be reduced to 1/10 its current size and would submit to human oversight for 50 years. The Velkari signed everything without negotiation. They had no choice. Their military was shattered, their emperor was broken, and their people had no will to continue fighting. They had learned the lesson that humanity intended to teach. Emperor Vathrok was returned to Velkari space in the same cage that had held him during the procession. The ship that carried him broadcast his arrival across all Velkari worlds. Billions watched as their former emperor, paralyzed and mentally shattered, was unloaded like cargo. Prince Darvok, who had declared himself the new emperor during his father's captivity, made the decision not to execute Vathrok. Death would have been merciful, and Darvok understood the value of the lesson his father represented. Instead, Vathrok was placed in a public display in the capital city, a living reminder of what happened when the Velkari Empire underestimated an enemy. Vathrok no longer recognized his own offspring. He could not speak coherently. His scales had turned completely gray and his eyes held no awareness. The being who had once commanded 47 star systems was reduced to an empty shell, kept alive only to serve as a warning. The galactic community was deeply divided in its response to humanity's actions. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss whether humanity's treatment of the Emperor constituted a war crime. Species that valued honor and dignity spoke passionately against humanity's cruelty. Ambassador Hyunwoo represented humanity at the council. He listened to the accusations with a calm face, then stood to respond. "You call us cruel," he said. "You call our actions barbaric. Perhaps you're right. But where was this council when the Velkari were bombing our cities? Where were your passionate speeches when 2 billion humans died in New York? Where was your sense of honor and dignity when we were facing extinction?" The council chamber fell silent. "The Velkari came to our worlds offering us a choice, surrender or die," Hyunwoo continued. "They didn't care about our honor or our dignity. They saw us as weak, as prey. We proved them wrong in the only language they understood. If that makes us barbaric in your eyes, we accept that judgment. We're still here, and that's what matters." The council voted on sanctions against humanity, but the motion failed. Too many species had seen what humans were capable of and wanted no part of making them angry. Some voted against sanctions out of fear. Others voted against them out of a new respect for humanity's determination. But the most important votes came from species that the Velkari had previously conquered. They had watched the procession with satisfaction. Seeing their former oppressor humiliated and broken, they sent messages to Earth thanking humanity for doing what they had never been able to do. On Earth, the cost of victory became clear. Captain Minji retired from military service the day after the surrender was signed. She moved to a small house in the countryside and rarely spoke to anyone. The weight of the decision she had made, the cruelty she had authorized, haunted her dreams. One evening, Ambassador Hyunwoo came to visit her. They sat on her porch watching the sunset in silence for a long time. "Was it worth it?" Hyunwoo finally asked. "All the things we did. Was it necessary?" Minji was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe we could have won with less cruelty. Maybe there was a better way. But I made the choices I thought would ensure humanity survived, and we did survive. Whether that justifies the means is a question for historians and philosophers." "Do you regret it?" "Every day," Minji said. "But I'd probably make the same choices again if I had to. That's what frightens me most." The years passed. Human engineers worked alongside former Velkari slaves to rebuild the destroyed cities. The ruins of Seoul, Tokyo, and New York slowly transformed into living cities again. Memorials were built to remember the dead, but life continued. 5 years after the war's end, Lieutenant Sung-ho, now promoted to captain, oversaw the first joint human-Velkari scientific mission. The project aimed to study a distant nebula, and it required cooperation between species that had recently tried to destroy each other. Sung-ho watched the young Velkari scientists work alongside their human counterparts. Most of them had been children during the war. They knew what had happened to Emperor Vathrok, but they also knew that the current peace was better than the alternative. Engineer Soo-hyun, who had built the Emperor's cage, now built bridges between worlds. She designed space stations where different species could meet and trade. Her work became a symbol of how humanity could create as well as destroy, how the same hands that had built instruments of humiliation could also build tools of cooperation. Dr. Han continued her work in psychology, but now she focused on helping war survivors from both species deal with trauma. She worked with Velkari warriors who still had nightmares about fighting humans. She worked with humans who couldn't forget the faces of the people they had killed. Peace required healing, and healing required understanding. Private Minsu, who had chosen to let the emperor live in suffering rather than grant him a quick death, struggled with that choice for years. He eventually became a teacher, working with children orphaned by the war. He taught them about history and choices, about how sometimes there are no good options, only less terrible ones. The galaxy learned to treat humanity with caution. Several aggressive empires that had been planning expansion into human space quietly shelved their plans. The images of Emperor Vathrok being dragged through ruins became a cautionary tale told across 1,000 worlds. Humanity earned a reputation. They were the species you didn't threaten, because they would do absolutely anything to survive. 20 years after the war, on the anniversary of the surrender, a memorial service was held in the rebuilt Sol. The Emperor's cage had been preserved and placed in a museum, a reminder of what humanity had done and what they had been forced to become. Old Minsu stood at the memorial with his students, young people who had been born after the war ended. They asked him questions about the procession, about the Emperor, about whether humans were the heroes or the villains of the story. "We were neither," Minsu told them. "We were survivors who did what we believed was necessary to protect our species. History will judge whether we were right or wrong. What matters is that we're still here to have this conversation, that you're here to ask these questions." A young student raised her hand. "Would you do it again, if another species threatened Earth?" Minsu looked at the preserved cage, remembering the broken Emperor, remembering the faces of the survivors who had lined the procession route. He thought about his family buried in the ruins of New York, about the 2 billion names on the memorial wall. "I hope we never have to find out," he said quietly. "But yes, if it came down to our survival or our reputation, I'd make the same choice. That's the real lesson of the war. Humanity will always choose to survive no matter what it costs." The students were quiet, thinking about his words. Above them, ships from a dozen different species passed through Earth's sky, trading and traveling in the peace that humanity's cruelty had created. The galaxy had learned its lesson well. Humanity was capable of terrible things when threatened. They would sacrifice their own people, destroy their own worlds, and break every rule of civilized warfare if that's what survival required. They were not the galaxy's heroes, and they didn't claim to be.